This is the Action Cast, the only podcast that wishes it had taken the blue pill. And now, our feature presentation. That part's over, Anthony. That already happened. So, hello, this is the Action Cast. My name is Joe Drilling, and tonight, on this illustrious panel of genre cinema experts, we have myself and Mr. Ethan Chang.
The Oracle told me I couldn't finish this plate of food in the first 5 minutes of the show, but I'm beginning to believe.
Mr. Bryce Wilson, who represented here by a cemetery from an old Hammer horror movie, apparently.
Cemeteries need love, just like everything else.
Sure, and
that's a Matrix Revolutions quote. Going deep here.
Wow. And of course, the one, the only Anthony Rogers, represented by his normal blue silhouette.
Yeah, that's me.
That is.
I couldn't think of a good Matrix quote. I was trying to think one about batteries, but I realized he doesn't actually say the word battery. He just holds it up and says this. It blew my whole idea.
He is also called Copper Top in the car.
That's true.
You had plenty of options.
That does happen. You did have options. So yeah, hey, we're going to be talking about The Matrix, and apparently Bryce is going to make some sort of tepid defense of the sequels tonight. But before
not a tepid defense of the sequels, it will be a full-throated defense.
Any defense of the Matrix sequels is, by its very nature, tepid because those movies are trash.
This is received wisdom, Joe, and I'm sick of it. And frankly, as far as trash goes, they have stayed in the cultural conversation for 20 years.
So have the Star Wars prequels. So have the Star Wars prequels.
I don't know when was the last time anyone got in any sort of discussion about that.
It is true. I mean, received wisdom that I think they're actually responsible for me not having seen this movie for like the last 14 or 15 years.
This movie's actually good. But before we dive into this, and before Bryce is allowed to attempt to defend a movie where a dude just sits in a chair and gives you like a plot dump for 10 of the most boring minutes of screen time in the history of action cinema, let's talk about...
Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't go that far.
Ergo concordantly. Vis-a-vis. Joe Drilling is wrong.
Right, so. Sure. Keep telling yourself that. Let's go ahead and talk about some news stuff while I stall it. Here we go. There's the sound bite.
This is Media Break. You give us 3 minutes, and we'll give you the world.
We can't.
You can't. But everybody else did. It's all part of the illusion, Anthony. I heard it, and the people heard it, and that's what's important. So, I've got a few items of action movie news. It seems like nobody else emailed to say that they also had bits of action movie news, so I'm just going to roll with what I got. If anybody thinks of anything in the interim, let me know. I'll start with the bad newses. I'll start with the understandable news, which rolls into the bad news, and then move on to the good news. The understandable news that is still kind of a bummer is that Halloween Kills, which is not an action movie, but is a genre picture, has been pushed to October of 2021.
I was disappointed to hear that, as someone who enjoyed Hallow Green.
Yes.
And was looking forward to it, but yeah, I mean, I'm split-minded a lot. Part of me goes like, it would have been nice to have that to look forward to as a VOD title, but part of me also looks forward to the theatrical experience on that one. So, Bert.
And apparently, the upshot is that we're getting an IMAX release out of it. Is the way I read the statement was, we have more time to polish it and give it an IMAX release and whatever. So.
Well, that sounds absolutely unnecessary.
Look, man, Quentin Tarantino shot a film that takes place entirely inside of a cabin in like 70 millimeter CinemaScope, and it was amazing. So I'll give Halloween and IMAX the benefit of the doubt, I guess.
Right, but Quentin Tarantino didn't direct Your Highness, so
Fair. The bad news on the heels of that news is apparently that Christopher Nolan loves movie theaters so much he wants people to risk death to see fucking Tenet and won't just kick it to next year, which is like...
Citation needed is my thing. I mean, I'll be shocked if this comes out because, like the films that started coming out when the coronavirus really hit, like no one will go out to see them. Like, they don't. Warner Brothers does not want a $40 million opening weekend for Tenet. So,
no, sure, of course they don't. But that's the. I'm just saying from what I read, the reason that it keeps getting nudged a little bit, is that Christopher Nolan has been arguing that he really wants it to come out. It was originally they were talking about it keeping its July 17th date. Then it got bumped to July 31st. Then it got bumped again just a little bit to August 12th. And apparently, from what I've read, according to the Hollywood Reporter, Warner Brothers wants to just kick it to next year. And Nolan, wants to be the guy who saves movies because he's got that... I don't know, dude.
I'll save my outrage for when this actually happens.
Sure.
To quote one Anthony Rogers next.
No, he
that was not a...
Yeah, that's not...
That's not his bit, but...
Maybe he wants to see how many different ways people can die by going to a Christopher Nolan movie on opening weekend.
Maybe.
Guys, I never actually listened
that was really
to the
bad.
show.
Oh my god.
But
that was... Wow. Dark.
Yeah.
Way to go there, Anthony.
But it's not like this isn't serious.
And with that, we're stopping the Action Cast Season 2. Thank you for joining us for these 3 episodes
I don't know.
and a quarter. That was it. We're done.
I probably should have just next, but I'm on Joe's side on this, but angrier. So I think it's just dumb.
It's just frustrating that's a stance that he would.
Yeah, exactly. For someone I generally like, it's just
Yeah, and I'm interested to see Tenet, and I would like to see it in a theater, but I would like to not go to a movie theater until people in Nashville can stop going down to Broadway to get drunk and getting sick and getting more people sick, and then kicking back our whole phased reopening because people are dumb and impulsive and whatever. Anyways, the 2 good newses that I have, one of them is related to the movie, so I'll save that one for last, I guess. And may debatably be a good news. I think it's a bit of a good news, but whatever. But I'm very interested to see, apparently, someone, I should probably actually pull up the news bit.
I'm interested to see someone too, after...
Yeah, after all this. Absolutely.
To quote another Christopher Nolan movie, I think we've all learned how good it is to see another human face. So...
Yeah, so, apparently... Derek Kolstad, who co-wrote the first 2 John Wick, all 3 of the John Wick films so far, is working alongside David Leitch to produce a TV show based on My Friend Pedro, which was a game that came out... Well, the original game, I guess, was a Flash thing and actually came out a while ago, but a full fleshed out version of the game came out last year for everything from Devolver Digital, and it's a very...
I know absolutely nothing about it except there's a banana on the cover.
Yeah, the banana is Pedro. Your friend Pedro is the banana who talks to you and tells you to kill Russian mobsters.
That is a good premise.
Yeah. So it's got very Deadpool vibes. There's a lot of fourth wall breaks. You play a dude in a mask who does a lot of slow-mo gunplay and stuff like that. I think
you had me, then you lost me.
I think that the guys...
Bryce doesn't like slow-mo gunplay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff where you get points for doing stuff like, riding a skateboard and then kicking off the skateboard into a guy's face, and then while he falls back from the skateboard hit, you shoot him in the gut, and then you bounce a bullet off of a frying pan which ricochets and hits his buddy on the other side of the room. And then it's that kind of sort of
like twin snakes.
kind of, but instead of just watching all that happen in the cutscenes, you do all of that, basically. So I quite enjoyed the game. I thought it was a lot of fun. It got a couple chuckles out of me, and there's a lot of really rad, fun stuff you can do with the guns and the slow-mo and the skateboards and the frying pans and different like level hazards and stuff that you can sort of jump off of, and it's a lot of fun. It's sort of like you don't skateboard the whole time, so that's not. But it's kind of like Tony Hawk, but like if you shot everybody instead of just doing tricks. Like you earn points by doing ridiculous things and keeping a kill streak and not taking damage and a lot of bullet timey stuff like that. So I think that the John Wick folks are really the perfect folks to work on this, and we'll see what happens with it. The last news bit that I have is that apparently, and this is, I mean, it's a good news in that I hope that they'll do the source material a little more justice, but it's a bad news in that I actually think the more recent actor to play this part is the better choice. And that is that apparently HBO is doing a John Constantine Hellblazer series. And Keanu Reeves is going to return to his role as John Constantine. Except I actually think that Matt Ryan is a much better John Constantine than Keanu Reeves.
More important question, will we have Desmond Husu back as Papa Midnight? Really now.
I don't know. That I cannot speak to. But I mean I hope so. Because I do like Jaimin Hansu for sure. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. Anybody have any opinions on any of those news bits, or does anybody else have any other news bits before we move on?
I'll say that before we move on to this other Keanu Reeves film, I will go on record as putting the Keanu Reeves Constantine as one of my very best bad movies, but favorite bad movies. But
you just like watching Gavin Rossdale get killed.
I do like watching Gavin. Not only but that's what I'm saying. It's like, I don't know if there's a word for anti-lightning in a bottle, because like that's a cast that you could only have had for like 5 minutes in 2005. So not only do you have Gavin Rossdale get beaten and then disintegrated by Tilda Swinton,
Mm-hmm.
but you have Shia LaBeouf bounce like a super ball by Peter Stormare's Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel Weisz just mad slumming it. And yes, Keanu, the man himself, sitting on a chair with a cat in his lap and his feet in a pail of water, patiently waiting to be sent to hell. With a soundtrack by Perfect Circle. I mean, brother, if that's not a good time at the movies, then what is? Like,
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I think the problem for me is that Keanu is just a little bit like too... He comes off as too good to be John Constantine. And part of the problem with that movie is they wrote him to be too good. Like, John Constantine is a son of a bitch, and he's a selfish son of a bitch, and that's part of what's sort of endearing about him in a way, is how cynical and how much of a son of a bitch he is. And he's also very blonde and very English, which Keanu Reeves is not, but Matt Ryan is. And I just felt like the shortly lived, I guess it was Fox. Was that on Fox? The one season of that show. I thought that captured the spirit of the Hellblazer comics a lot better than the film. But I'm interested. I mean, I like Keanu, and so I'm interested to see what they do with it. And yeah, I'll check it out for sure, because I do really like John Constantine.
I enjoyed that film. I don't expect to enjoy this series because that's just my disposition these days. So I don't expect to enjoy anything. Happiness is a foreign emotion.
I mean, if you won't be ever disappointed if that's your posture.
Yes.
To quote another great film, "Welcome to the Human Race."
Yes.
That is a film.
That's a segue right there. I feel like, so
So we last month
was the greatest action movie of 1998, and now we're going to talk. Actually, I think it's 97. And then now we're
Doesn't matter. Whatever year it came out.
It was the greatest movie soundtrack of 1997, and now we're going to talk about the greatest movie soundtrack of 1999.
Oh my god, I have so much to say about the soundtrack. We'll get there.
So, we last month we did Excalibur, and then like at the end of the show, we were like, wow, June is Pride Month, and we probably should have figured out something appropriate to do for that. And then we talked about, well, we could have done The Matrix, and then we were like, well, let's just do The Matrix next time, which is this time. So we're talking about The Matrix, which I had not watched. I watched it so many times when I was in high school and college that I still remembered every important part of this movie,
Right.
But I actually had not watched it in probably close to 15 years until tonight.
Yeah, it had also been about 15 years for me, and I think it had been, I don't know, maybe 16 or 17. It had been long enough that I was taken in by the pulse pounding action. Right? Like I didn't remember every single action beat, which was really cool, actually.
I'll just say for me, it definitely hadn't been that long, but this has probably fallen out of yearly rotation for me to once every 2 or 3 years. But it had been a decent gap since I'd watched it, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that it both held up, and the parts of it that were time capsule-y were charmingly so rather than detrimentally so. And we can talk about some of this later, but also functional to the plot in a lot of ways, which I thought was clever of them. So so yeah, I think all of us had a good time at this film.
Yeah.
I'll just add to the chorus.
Yeah.
It's probably been 15 years, I don't know, ish, since I watched it like 3 or 4 years ago on an airplane, but the sound wasn't really working, so I only kind of half watched it and fell asleep. But
That doesn't count. That doesn't
that
count.
doesn't
What do you think
count,
it is about this movie that made it so we all loved it when it first came out, and then a plurality of us spent a decade plus not caring about it at all?
I don't think it's that I didn't care about it, but I think so. Okay. If we want to start with that, we can start with that.
Well, I've got two answers.
Let's
All
wait
right.
to talk about the sequels a little bit. But
No, that's not. But that's not my reason.
was
My
one of
reason
my
is
two
not.
answers.
Is not.
That
Yeah.
wasn't
Okay.
entirely what I was getting at.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what the answer is.
No, for me, honestly, I think it's that fuck it, we'll just talk about it now. For me, it's that a bunch of movies came out in its wake that tried to do what it did and did it like half as good or worse. And it just, the style of it got tiresome because there were a bunch
my
of Me
answer-
Too's
Yes.
doing it
My
poorly.
answer was Burnout completely.
Yeah.
Both because that movie was everywhere for a few years, and then The Imitators. It just, I could not.
I would agree, and I think it's worth noting that The Imitators have been particularly bad. And when your peak imitation is the Underworld franchise, then something has done fucked up somewhere. But what I will say is, I feel like in a weird way, like, and I was trying to think of a way to articulate this when we first were making the segue, but I feel like people forget like what a cultural juggernaut this fucking thing was.
I think all of us are the appropriate age to not forget that, but I think people who are younger than us. I was actually thinking about that. I feel like there are people who are in college or high school now are like the way I was when I first saw Halloween, which was like I suddenly was like, oh, this is where all of that stuff that everybody doesn't like came from. Like all of those tropes and all of that stuff came from Halloween. But when Halloween did it, it was like interesting and original. And I feel like if a kid watches The Matrix now, they'll be like, oh, I get it.
Okay, but let me kind of talk about like, so here's what's interesting to me, and like what I remember is my first reaction to the movie almost being hostility, because growing up, like, I was definitely a fucking nerd, right? And like I was a nerd of like the 80s stuff, so so for me like sci-fi films were like Terminator and the Mad Max series and like even Highlander. And what I remember about The Matrix is that it instantly made all of those things look fucking so obsolete that it wasn't even funny. Like I could not manage to have a conversation with anyone about any of those franchises. I mean, not that people gave a fuck about them before, but after post Matrix, they really did not give a fuck. Like I vaguely, I mean, like I vividly remember trying to explain to someone why I liked the first Terminator, and like them literally not being able to understand the points I was making, just how fucking, you know, the Matrix made all that look. Now on a larger timeline, I think that effect is lessened a little.
I would say that does not hold up, and
But there was definitely this real feeling watching the film that the future is now. You know, it has arrived, and this is what it is. I remember, like, even the effects talk that this came out the same year as The Phantom Menace did, and the way it made that film, you know, that it had, like, that was supposed to be this game-changing next-level thing, that it had, you know, the domestic product of several small countries invested in it, look completely useless.
I mean, that movie was completely useless, though, so, I mean, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't know that at the time.
But, yeah. But when you're talking about, like, the long influence of this stuff, like, what I'm trying to find hard to articulate is, like, if you're talking about, like, the influence that The Matrix had on film, I think it's pretty negligible. Like, you had this 5-year period when all of a sudden, where, like, for a little bit, people tried to, like, copy the bullet time moves. You know, they would have, like I think I even remember Romeo Must Die, them trying to get poor Jet Li to do bullet time. And then, like, you had this other 5-year period where all the heroes and villains would be hackers and wear, you know, leather jackets, so you'd have, like, your Operation Swordfishes and whatnot. And then it just kind of lagged, you know, and then obviously the superhero boom came, and that kind of changed the game there. But
well, what's funny is that the things that they took from it were all the worst things were the things that were taken from it, like the vinyl trench coats and the sunglasses and all of that stuff is what got taken from it. And not the, like, I was actually astounded watching this movie this far down the line, an action movie from 1999, being like, they're holding the camera still while they punch each other. Like, the camera is locked down in wide medium shots where you can see both of the actors' faces, so you know they're not doubles, while they're hitting each other. This is amazing. I can't believe this, because this is from right before that took hold. The shaky cam bullshit took hold.
3 years before The Bourne Identity, maybe?
It's the same year as End of Days, which, as I said last month, was the first movie that I remember noticing that shit in.
But what I was going to say is that where I really feel like that this film's cultural footprint is like what it did for nerd culture, and I know that it has, like, morphed into this whole weird fucking juggernaut of vile shit sometimes, like, on its own. But, like, I feel like you really can point a point A and point B where, you know, before this, I was, you know, saving up my money so I could buy $25 VHS tapes of Cowboy Bebop with 2 episodes on them, you know, and was absolutely felt like I was the only one who gave, like, a shit about any of this. And then The Matrix has opened all of this stuff up, you know, so, like, all of a sudden, like, it's not that, like, bootleg John Woo films became, like, cool or whatever, but, like, suddenly became accessible.
I mean, they kind of did. They kind of did.
That felt like a secret, like, became an open secret, and it just really changed the discourse and what was available and, like, the palette that people could draw on. And I think, like, a lot of it you have to, like, draw back to this specific film.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that for sure. I think so. I saw this movie, I think, 3 times in the theater, at least. I saw it with my grandmother in Arizona when it first came out in the spring, because I was there for, you know, with my family for Brewers spring training, you know, spring break type thing. And my grandma is actually, like, sort of a closet sci-fi fan, and so, like, she and I went to see it. I think just the 2 of us, if I remember correctly. And then I saw it with my friends when I came back, and then I saw it again with my friends, probably at the cheap theater, another time, maybe even 2 more times. Then I probably saw it at midnight, you know, at some point in the years that followed. And it was on it, and this is part of why I hadn't watched it in 15 years. It was on at, like, every party I went to, because of the soundtrack, because of the fashion, like the sort of, goth club kid hybrid, like at 16 years old, like that, the nightclub in this movie at the beginning, like I hung out in places like that. I still hang out in places like that on occasion. But I hung out in places like that at 16.
Through the witches and dig through the ditches.
Dude,
and drag on the back of your Dracula.
You know what? I'm going to tell you right now. That song is way overplayed, but I think that record is still... I like that record a lot. And the two White Zombie records before that, Astro Creep and Los Exorcisto, are also both good records.
I believe I am on the record...
held up super well.
I believe I am on the record of being the Action Cast's foremost Rob Zombie apologist.
Yeah, you like all of his movies, or most of his movies, too.
All of them except for Super Beasto and 31, yeah.
Wow, even 3 from Hell, huh?
Yeah, it was fun.
Okay, I haven't watched it yet. A friend of mine borrowed my Shudder login because she wanted to watch it, and then she was like, that was not good. And I was like, okay.
For my record, someone referred to it as the Devil's Rejects DLC, and I feel like that's very accurate. The first 10 minutes are kind of rough, but then it basically becomes Rob Zombie using these characters to make the movies that Hollywood won't let him make. So it's not really a horror movie. Like at first it's a prison movie, and then like in its second act it's a horror film. And then it kind of morphs into this very strange Robert Rodriguez action film at the end, and it's got Richard Edson in it. So good time was had.
Well, that helps. I thought House of a Thousand Corpses, it was hard for me because it was so high, because I liked his music at the time, and it was this, the Universal won't release it, man. They won't release it because it's too violent, it's too subversive. And then when it finally came out, I was like, that was just Texas Chainsaw Massacre again. What was so subversive about that they wouldn't release it? Like,
it's messy, but it's fun.
It was fine. But I like Devil's Rejects. I actually like his first Halloween. I think is totally fine. I think it gets way...
is one of like the most aggressive and strange horror films that have been released by a major studio in quite a while.
None of those words are good. None of those words are good horror films. Aggressive, strange.
No, aggressively. Let me put them together as aggressively strange, and that will maybe explain why I like that movie a lot. But I know I've just derailed it as the derail. But here's my.
I was gonna say I'm trying to go like 2 derailments back.
Here's my real review of 3 from Hell. Is House of a Thousand Corpses is the kind of messy film that you make when you think you're making your first movie, and 3 from Hell is the kind of messy film that you make when you think you're making your last. So That sounds like a good time to you. Then go for it.
I mean, I have a Shudder account, so I may as well just watch it because it's free to me at this point. So
The Matrix.
Yeah.
So wait, so the back in the cultural
zeitgeist.
I also but it's hard, and I'm this is an echo chamber in this group to know what its bigger cultural impact was, because I was right in high school, and I knew people both in middle school and high school that were all about this movie, and and also everybody had seen it. That's the other weird thing. Joe, you were talking about all the specific things that were you were into that this movie had, but everyone saw this movie.
Yes.
And it's nobody was into that shit, but I mean, not many people were. There was a very small.
Yeah, right. It was all of a sudden the preppy kids at school were like, "Yeah, man, propeller heads," and I was like,
yeah,
2 weeks ago, you didn't know who the fuck the propeller heads were.
Yeah, exactly. But everybody saw it and everybody liked it, and so it's this. But it's also weird because it's a cultural touchstone for us because we're all fairly within the same age range. So I don't know what it's like for people that were already in college or beyond when this movie came out, or people that were in elementary school and just totally missed it. I
have no idea. No idea.
That's what I was trying to say, is that it mainstreamed this stuff, as close to mainstreaming it as it ever got. And but I mean, 4 years before this, sci-fi was Johnny Mnemonic and Strange Days, and then all of a sudden it was the fucking Matrix, and so the cultural cash.
What?
Johnny Mnemonic. Johnny Mnemonic has some really fun moments. I rewatched it not that long ago. But it's a real bad movie with a couple of moments where you're like, that's pretty cool.
So good.
The cultural footprint expanded. The Grinch heart grew 37 sizes that day. is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah.
And it's just weird that it was just this lightning in a bottle moment for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like you were talking about this, all of a sudden people knew who, Yuan Ping was all of a sudden after this movie. And everybody, was into the music, and I knew people who had never worn a black trench coat in their lives. And all of a sudden they had a black duster. And I was like, that's weird.
The other thing about being like the specific age group that I am,
not just the specific age group. We all four of us met on a fucking message board.
Well,
right.
Yeah, that's true.
Self-selecting group
for sure.
Yeah.
But okay, so like what I was gonna say is, my wife is not like that, and yet we like started talking about the how like she and her friends like quoted this movie all the time and stuff. But then the other thing we started talking about were the black trench coats, and we were like, yeah, this movie came out a month before Columbine.
Yeah.
And like, you can't not think about that if you're our age. And that's a weird thing too. Like, this movie brings up all kinds of stuff that Phantom Menace didn't.
Well, Phantom Menace was post-Columbine, so that's a little different.
But what I mean is, like, that is the same year, right?
Yeah, same year.
And, like, I don't think about all of this wider stuff about what life was like then the way I do when I watch this movie.
Well,
I feel almost... does anyone else feel like me that when I think about the Columbine Massacre and I think about this movie, Columbine feels like it was maybe 7 or 8 years before this? Like this?
No, absolutely not.
No,
this is so much.
No, I'm 100% with Anthony. They feel contemporaneous in the way that they in reality were contemporaneous to me.
Like even more so, where it was like, oh, yeah, like the people that were super into the Matrix. Like, I'm not surprised that 2 of them would have done that. Like that, like
that feels like a bridge slightly too far.
No. What I mean is, like, I wasn't surprised that those things are sort of related.
Were they related? Aside from happening within 2 months of each other? I mean, I feel like you're reaching here.
Yeah. I feel like you're reaching, but I think that's kind of also brings up a good point.
I feel like there were like parents groups who were like, oh, there's the lobby shootout, and then these kids did this thing in the black trench coats and the black trench coats. But I never felt like that was actually reality. I felt like that was Fox News fear mongering about the lobby shootout and Doom and listening to Pop Elite itself and all of this shit and
But I think that I agree with Joe more or less, but I do think that brings up an excellent point, which is I think part of the reason for this movie's popularity at the time, part of the reason for its enduring popularity, and something that you really have to deal with when you're unpacking this film's legacy is the fact that you can basically read whatever you want into it. Like that is this movie is one big old fat Rorschach blot. And we can all like laugh at the irony that basically the alt-right took as its slogan from a film by 2 trans filmmakers, but like it's not understandable. Like, there's a reason Alex Jones embraces the shit out of this movie. There's a reason why the darker parts of the internet have embraced this movie. There's a reason why fucking Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. are quoting this movie. Like,
have they actually embraced the film though, or have they just embraced that one scene that represents a thing that is, like you said, a Rorschach test?
Does it matter? Like, if someone came in with like an AK-47, opened fired in a Walmart and was screaming "Use the Force" the whole time, like, would
I associate that with Star? But would I associate that with Star Wars? No, I would just be like, well, that's a weird dude that did. Right, I would associate those words with Star Wars, but would I associate a person doing something so wildly out of left field and horrible with George Lucas in any meaningful way? No, I wouldn't.
I agree with Joe, and I want to rephrase what I said earlier, but first I want to hear from Ethan.
I think that and obviously there's like some dark associations that have come with some like cultural items in this movie, like the blue pill and the red pill, but I think that I would still call it a strength of the movie, even though I've come to associate that with a lot of dark shit and like Alex Jones and
MRAs and incels and fucking right.
The conflict in the movie, like the storyline conflict, is like just specific enough that you can read it as a metaphor for whatever you want, and just amorphous enough that you can read it as a metaphor for whatever you want. So
yeah.
like, everyone can do like, this movie is about my problems. Like,
right.
This movie, there's the thing that I'm feel trapped.
Well,
and
it's
and this movie is about that.
It's also, I mean, we talked about, we were all nerds to varying degrees, and it's a big nerd empowerment fantasy. And so I think that the sad dorks who don't understand why the women who obviously owe them sex, because that's how that works, aren't giving them the sex that they're owed, because that's definitely how that works, imprinted themselves on this movie, because this is a movie about a hacker who is a software developer by day, who learns kung fu not by, Hoist Gracie trained in jiu-jitsu in Brazil with his family for 20 years, and eventually became the best fighter in the world for a time. Neo becomes the best fighter in the world because a computer program jacks into his brain and he learns jiu-jitsu in 30 seconds.
And like the perfect organism in Alien, you do have to admire it as like the perfect power fantasy,
right?
Essentially,
right.
I'm just getting the cheat code on reality,
right? Right.
Would like what they would see when they watch this movie is that when he gets pulled out of the Matrix and he gets to kind of like exist in the white room where he has his residual self-image.
Right. Yeah.
The incels would read that as like, oh, this is like where he gets to have the bone structure that he knows that he's like, the facial bone structure that he knows that he was born deserving to have.
Right.
In the movie,
instead of the one he's referred to as the Chad.
He does have a really good haircut in that scene, though, and
he does. He does. Yeah, that haircut does not look out of place in 20. That's a timeless haircut. It's a timeless haircut.
Aside from I was lovingly referencing the Rob Zombie needle drop earlier, but a lot of the fashion doesn't look as bad as you would think it is.
Well, that's
something that was iconic as this movie was.
That's because having still haunted those kind of like goth clubs, the people in those clubs still wear that stuff. That's why.
Right.
But the soundtrack, I guess, since we keep going back to that, the soundtrack is killer. Like, it's got Ministry and the Propeller Heads and...
It's got a fucking Ministry. I could not figure out where that plays in the movie.
I wasn't paying super close attention.
Not as strange as seeing Ministry show up in AI, but...
That's true, but like Deftones and Meat Beat Manifesto is on this soundtrack, which like... What?
It truly is a Crow level soundtrack.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that this. So Eric Allen and I were on guesting on a wrestling podcast yesterday afternoon, and the sort of notion of the soundtrack album came up, and I think actually. I would say that Scott Pilgrim is actually the last great soundtrack album, but it felt like a throwback by the time it came out. So I'm going to posit that this was the last, like, culturally relevant soundtrack album that everybody had, and now if you go to a used CD store, where they still exist, there's a million copies of this this. Yes. Like The Crow, like High Fidelity, like Grosse Point Blank, like like Empire Records.
And I know we sound like three fucking middle-aged guys, which we are, but like this movie was fucking ubiquitous. Like it's like
you could not get away from it.
Yeah.
Until Star Wars, and even after.
And it's not like we don't have ubiquitous movie experiences anymore, because obviously, fucking Marvel. But at the same time, like something this unique and strange, and that's what I'm gonna kind of get into when I get into the sequels. Is I can't imagine any of the big franchises taking the types of risk that this movie takes. Like this franchise, for better or for worse, swings for the fucking fences, and like it's doing it from the beginning. There's just so much confidence to its vision.
It never dumps. I've never seen the sequels, and I know that people say that the sequels do this, but this movie doesn't dump lore on you. I've never seen them.
That's
This movie-
amazing. We should have
there's
made
no
you
wall
watch it.
jumps in this movie, and that's
Yeah,
like,
right.
almost impossible for a sci-fi movie.
There's
It's a
very little lore
fantastic-
dump. Yeah.
It's a fantastic case of showing and not telling. Like,
Yeah, my favorite thing is that the movie heavily implies but never spells out for you that the agents can find them when they use their phones. And I love that it's never explicitly explained to you. It's just done well enough that you know when someone makes a cell phone call, that's how the agents
They can
find
be
them.
traced.
They can
Yeah.
be traced.
And I think that's kind of like just when we talk about that time capsule stuff, like, and once again, I know like the nostalgia's been strong on this cast, but it did kind of make me really miss Internet 1.0 when the internet was like a cool place where you could go and meet cool people and like-minded friends, and not just like this vortex of hate that was screamed at you
People
out of
just
your
put
doom
weird websites up
rectangle
for no
every
reason.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and like I love like
Well-
one example that I noticed this time out that I hadn't noticed before is how important phone lines are to the plot.
Yep.
Because fucking
Yep.
Wi-Fi wasn't even thought of like back then, and like it's just like fascinating like how the limitations of 1999 internet factor into the story, but not in like an dated like, oh, this is taking me out of the movie way, but like way that they pushes up against those limitations and has to find workarounds for them, keep creating these interesting little story moments.
And
So-
also, it does one of my favorite things where they specifically say the Matrix was built around the end of the 19th century, or 20th century, and they're like it like grounds it in a way that it's not weird, because the technology that I have now, like that's not when it's set.
Right.
Like most
Yeah.
movies just treat like their modern day, and it's like, well, as soon as you say modern day, but you were a movie made in like the early 90s, you look dated as shit.
In
Yeah.
the movie, they say that they picked the late 20th century as like the peak of society. It's like you know, like the late Clinton years when there was a lot of prosperity around the world and there was no cell phone cameras, so no one saw any of the bad
Yeah,
shit
I was gonna
going
say.
on. So I guess what the movie is saying then is that the time when there's like AI and you know whatever the nuclear winter, that must happen sometime after now, because the reason why they picked 1999 to set the Matrix in is because they didn't want to have like COVID and shit.
Yes.
Well,
Right, yeah, exactly, right.
Right. Exactly.
Well, I mean, yeah, and
We're
in the movie,
post-peak
it's suggested very heavily that as soon as that AI is right around the corner, and as soon as that comes, then it's all downhill for you fucking
Right.
apes.
Which is, I mean, you mentioned that you felt like this obsoleted Terminator, Bryce, but actually watching it now, I was like, it is so,
Oh, no, no,
and
I
even
felt
at the
right.
time, you felt like in the moment, in the moment,
and what-
it obsoleted
it's not-
Terminator.
Yeah,
It's cribbed exactly from Terminator. We built a computer that was too smart and decided we had to die.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oops,
No, I mean,
we
this-
fucked up.
No, this movie is standing on the shoulders of everything, and that's what I'm talking about. Like when it mainstreamed the stuff, and to the Wachowskis' credit, they've always been more than happy to acknowledge this, and we can talk about like the whole Animatrix project later. But you know, you have like, yes, obviously there's heavy influential design from Ghost in the Shell in this thing. Obviously, they're borrowing the shit from James Cameron in this thing. You know, Cowboy Bebop is obviously like an influence in a lot of the action scenes. So it's not like that's like I said. I know I wasn't articulating as well as I could, but that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Was what was so surreal and so cool about the Matrix, and once again, like I know this is verging on nerd speak, was seeing all of this stuff that had made me like the weirdo and had made me like, you know, like the outsider, and like seeing it embraced, and like that was like step one, and then step two was just seeing all this other shit that I cared about like get just swept off the table all of a
Do
sudden.
you think
And,
that it
like
was
just
embraced in a way that made you feel embraced as a nerd teenager?
no,
or
because
was it
I still wouldn't be able to make friends for 5 or 10 years after that movie was
Yeah,
made. But
I
no.
feel like you would be like, this movie's just like my Japanese animes, and they would.
No. I wasn't that much of a fucking weeb. I didn't lead with that stuff, but like it was just weird to see. And like I said, with the thing that I noticed about it was just how much it became like nerd culture. Like I can imagine. I don't know. Like this is probably like an imperfect, essays, but it probably was like being like a 14-year-old kid who was still reading like the Ultimate Comic Universe Marvel comics like the week before Iron Man came out, and like just all of a sudden would watch this like suddenly become like like this doesn't matter anymore. This is the new shit. Now I'm not saying that like in a bitter way, because as to be clear, I like the new shit, and I really like the Wachowskis, and I really like pretty much their entire body of work with. Well, I was going to say without reservation, but that's not strictly true. But I just like about just about everything they've done, and even the stuff that I don't wholeheartedly like, I can appreciate. But it was just a very surreal moment of just realizing that no one was going to give a shit about Beyond the Thunderdome anymore. There was a new set of toys in town, and this is what it was.
Yeah. So I mean,
it's funny because like I feel like some of the stuff that it referenced or like drew from, I sort of recognized and like appreciated that, like, oh man, they made this thing that I liked cool.
Yeah.
Like Ghost in the Shell is one.
Yeah. Or Akira. Or
yeah, right. Or like to pull a totally different example, the first time I heard Wu-Tang Clan's first album, I was like, man, they watch the same like crappy movies on TV Saturday mornings that I did. That's awesome, but they are like infinitely cooler than I am. But it's nice that like somebody made the thing that I liked cool.
Well, that's what I'm trying to and like
Kung Fu movies were always cool. Like let's not.
They were, but people didn't think that for a while.
We can talk about
were stupid.
We can talk about all the ways, all the fucking terrible ways that nerd culture has evolved. But if I had to like sum it up to one thing, like it's this concept of ownership, and that's what I'm not coming out of this as a bitter way. I'm really not. I'm not like saying like like I liked Kung Fu and Ghost in the Shell and Rob Zombie before they did, and then they made it all posers. I'm just trying to talk about like how weird it was, that like the bootleg, like literally just like getting like a bootleg VHS of The Killer,
right,
was like before like at a scuzzy video store, and like all of a sudden like having that stuff be under this much wider lens. Like it was just a very strange moment.
Yeah, I mean, like, so first of all, I think you were not coming off that way. Just to be totally clear, you were not coming off that way to me.
How you were going to end it. Yeah.
That you weren't coming off as like, oh well, like I like these things and all these.
They don't
weird,
really know
yeah.
because they haven't read.
Right.
But I think in that vein though, I will say that all of a sudden there were, and this is going to sound a certain way, but like from my personal experience, all of a sudden there were girls who were into this stuff that I had been into, and that was super rad. Well,
I mean,
the very last word of that sentence saved it.
Yeah, right. Yes, right. Yes. No. It's weird, but there was a time when if you were a nerdy dude, you actually wanted girls to be into the weird nerdy shit you were into, rather than screaming at them on the internet that they weren't real.
They didn't like it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That used to be you'd be like, man, I really wish a girl would want to go see a martial arts sci-fi action movie with me and then talk about how cool it is afterwards.
I mean, I feel like Bryce is this times 1,000, maybe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I feel
that's
like
a frightening statement to hear, but yeah,
right?
Go for it.
This is the kind of stuff where like I think about maybe this is why I like introducing people to things that I like.
Right.
Because I spent so much of my like younger years being like, "Oh man, I love this thing. You should check it out," and then like either being dismissed or like having to work to get someone to like try stuff, and then it's like, yeah, see, this thing is rad.
And I know we're losing the plot here a little bit, but once again, like I kind of made the joke before that we all met on a message board, but like here's the thing, back in the day, you didn't like go like, oh man, my life is super great and like I've got all the friends I need, I'm gonna go join a message board, like you went because you were lonely and nerdy and like you wanted people to share stuff with. So I really do, and I don't know how you change it back, because the thing is, I hate where geeks are today, but I also hate talking about geek
where they
shit
were,
because obviously it's brought a lot of good things into my life, and I'm still on a fucking podcast in my mid-30s, so obviously like that side of my personality hasn't gone away, but like and I think this is part of the Wachowski
Right.
case
I mean,
too, is there used to be a time where being a geek meant that you wanted to share shit.
Right.
And now it feels like it's a time where you want to keep shit to yourself. And I don't know
gatekeeping is 100% what people want to. Not 100%, but it's what a lot of people want to do, especially the shittier part. Especially the people who claim they have taken the red pill. They love to gatekeep.
Yeah.
That's their favorite thing. But that's a bunch of bullshit.
Are like the agents, and we're the
right.
We
right.
are the resistant.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just the thing I've been trying to get at with this whole kind of rambling introduction. Is to me there really is a great.
We're an hour into the podcast, and it's still.
But there's a great sense in this movie of exuberance, of like real joy in this stuff, even if it's a bleak and like film at times. Is like this real joy of finding all this cool stuff and like, you know, putting it in your fucking dome for a decade, and then like cooking out this thing and like wanting to share it with people. And I'm not saying that's the reason why it caught on, because no, it caught on because Warner's marketing department went overtime with it. But like there's a real feeling of joy to this movie that I found myself responding to.
That's another
thing.
thing.
You guys ever see one of those Matrix takedown videos where it's like comparing shot for shot, like
a red letter, like one of those YouTube.
Kinda like it's like
holes.
in the like I know kung fu scene, like they're like showing shot for shot like the same moves from like whatever movie they like cribbed from, and it's like
nope, because I sure as shit
man.
do not
like,
need to
right,
see somebody.
I've had people show me that, and I'd be like, yeah, well that movie was rad. What's your point? Like,
yeah, I mean,
like.
That's
You're not going to find any purchase here.
Tarantino does that all the time, and it's
exactly.
Like
right.
Scorsese does it all the time too. Like who cares?
And those people are clearly hack directors.
Yeah,
they can't come up with their own stuff.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So speaking of the we should talk about the film itself rather than just the cultural zeitgeist around it. But the thing that you mentioned, Bryce, is the marketing. And I remember I was actually as I was sitting there watching the movie, I was remembering that the marketing was very good, and that all of the trailers that I recall seeing around the release focused on what is the Matrix. Do you want to know about the Matrix? And we did not know, like none of the trailers, nothing explained. Like you had a sense of like something isn't as it seems, whatever. But like they never, none of the marketing came out and said to you, the Matrix is the fake reality, and this guy is going to break us out of the fake reality. Like, no, the whole thing was the mystique of what is the Matrix. And
they really did save the heel turn for the film itself.
They really did. And I feel, I just, there's so many trailers that I see now, and this style of trailer making drives me absolutely nuts. That it's a relief when I see a trailer and then I see the movie and realize they didn't do this. But especially for mainstream, big tentpole movies from Hollywood studios, the trailer is a 3-minute version of the whole movie, like in sequential order, and it just walks you right through the movie. And I'm just like, why? Like, do you want me to see the movie? Because you literally just laid out beat for beat the whole movie in 3 minutes, and I don't know why you would do that. And this movie did not do that in the marketing at all.
I don't remember the marketing for this at all.
Well, yeah. What is the Matrix? Yeah,
although I
do
remember being
tagline.
Surprised. So I remember sitting there being like, "Oh shit, this is like a legit sci-fi movie."
I'll just note that this was the first like film whose online presence really got me was the Donnie Darko one, because they had a great interactive website. But this was also, I think, one of the very first films that had a significant online presence.
This and Blair Witch.
And Space.
Oh yeah, good point. And Space.
Blair Witch was, and this and yes, the Space Jam website is still up. Yes, it's still there. This and Blair Witch were both 99, and those were the movies that I felt really took internet marketing to a level that honestly it really hasn't. Like now the internet is just, like now it's just they drop a trailer on YouTube. They don't do that kind of weird viral marketing that much anymore. But those two movies, like the Blair Witch website was set up as though like these 3 people really went missing, they're really dead, and here's pictures of the film canisters that we found in the woods, and here's pictures of their gear that we found in the woods, and here's and like people really went in for that. Like, I remember visiting family that summer and having my great aunt tell me that, like, no, those people really died. Like, it's a documentary. Those people are really dead. And I was like, I don't think so.
The Space Jam website is amazing.
Sure.
It has the site map. It's,
But-
oh god,
right.
it's good.
So,
So maybe an hour 10 in, we should start talking about the movie. But
probably.
we talked about like the power fantasy aspects of it before.
right.
Well, I mean,
well,
okay.
so
Talk
at the
about what the Matrix is. The opening trendy scene's pretty fucking good, right?
yes, the opening Trinity scene is pretty good, where she's doing some elite hacking. This was also part of the Hackers Are Cool Hollywood, like, started with Hackers with Johnny Lee Miller and Angelina Jolie, which is a movie that I fully understand and recognize is actually not very good, but I still love it anyways.
Correct.
Yes,
That is the
and
correct way to feel about
is
that.
another great soundtrack movie. But that movie and this movie and several other movies in the 90s really, like, walked a mile to make it seem like hackers were super cool, extremely social kids into underground music and dressing like trendy club kids and, like, making out and boning when they weren't, you know, on their
Actually, all look like Steve
We're
Wozniak.
doing any of that.
right, yeah, right. Right. And so you have Trinity, who is doing some elite hacking, and then she does, like, a sweet fucking crane kick to a cop. I also love the way this movie tells us to
Plays
disregard.
now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, there are some moments when Morpheus, the scene where Morpheus gets captured, that really.
Yes, I made that comment while we were watching it.
But she does a sweet kick, and this movie does not right off the bat, but eventually, before it gets too important, this movie lets us know that collateral damage is fine, because anybody who's still jacked into the Matrix could be an agent. So if they get killed in the crossfire, like, oh well.
The part of that I do find is funny, and this is going ahead, is just Neo just tagging that security guard, like, with, like, his full banana clip at the beginning of the lobby scene.
Yes.
Because that dude is not even a cop. Like, he is just he is a
guy.
850 an hour security guard, and, like, he gets it worse than anyone in this movie. But I think, when we're talking about, like, the show don't tell and, like, the way this film parcels out its mythology, like, that's pretty much all I have to say about the opening scene. Is it's a really good example of throwing you in the deep end and just letting you figure out shit by yourself.
Yeah,
The only weird thing about the opening scene is that the agents talk to the cops, and for the rest of the movie, they, like, treat them as if, like, they're only vessels to be used, like,
they I mean, you don't see them speak to the cops, but they definitely direct it, like in the scene where Morpheus gets caught. He does talk to the cops right before.
It just feels a little,
right before six cops beat a black guy with riot batons. Agent Smith says, "Take him," and then they do. That's good. But in the beginning, the thing that Megan commented on right away as we were watching it, she was like, what a weird idea that there would be a tech company where all these people are wearing suits and they're expected to be in their cubicle at a certain time.
Right. Yeah, David Wong always makes great jokes about that, about how, like, the corporate hellscape, like, films of the 90s all kind of look like paradise now. It's like, wait, you mean they have job security? They're not just, like, temps? And there's none of this open floor plan bullshit. They all have, like, cubicles and whatnot. Like, it's bizarre. But I think part of, like, you know, we talked about, like, the power fantasy aspects of this film and whether they're ultimately positive or negative. But once again, I think you have to acknowledge how good of a job this film makes of making his life look like fucking drudgery, you know, right at the like the beginning of this film. Like, you know, you have that opening scene of him at his computer, and, like, Keanu Reeves, who's better looking than any of us will ever be on his worst day, you know, just looks completely sallow and like shit, and like is obviously unhappy and insomniac, and then, you know, just going into the office just to get completely dressed down and emasculated, and, you know, it's only like a space of like 5 minutes, but it does, like, just make you feel like that this guy's just world is full of shit, you know.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, we'll get to the power fantasy stuff shortly, because that's where the movie goes fairly quickly. Although this is a pretty long movie, especially for the pre-superhero era. A 2 hour and 15 minute action movie is If you're not James Cameron, that's pretty beefy for the 90s, if we're being sincere here.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that you can say the power fantasy is good or bad. It just kind of is. I think that there are some people who took the wrong thing from it, but I don't misconstrue me talking about how ridiculous it is that, the nerd doesn't have to work at all to be a kung fu master. As anything other than a joke. I don't think it's necessarily a negative thing. I just think some people
I
went
kinda
the wrong
do.
direction with it.
Well, let me just say that, like, I mean, one of my favorite authors, these days is Jason Pargin, who writes under the name David Wong, and like he's got this great book called Futuristic Violence in Fancy Suits, which in a lot of ways just feels like a direct response to The Matrix, and like, and he has like this character has this monologue about this magic trick that he learned, and he goes like, no, you have to understand, like, the reason I can do this trick is because I worked on it every fucking day. So like, when someone else was like doing team sports or like studying or socializing or being in a relationship, like I was doing this. And basically the point of the book and this monologue is that skill takes work. Skill takes like dedication and practice and tough. And if you're gonna like sit on your couch and eat cheese pops and play Madden all day, you're not going to achieve skill. And The Matrix certainly isn't the only film that is like, given this, you are the chosen one, you don't have to do anything to maintain that status fantasy. But it's certainly maybe the most prominent example. And once again, one of the things that I really like.
Well, I mean, the whole Superman mythos.
You're right. Well, it's the way that it very much subtly pushes against that.
I mean, anyway, subtly, he's still Jesus Christ, imbued with the power to do all the stuff, even when the movie is kind of pushing back against it in the sequels. That's part of what I don't love about the sequels, but we can talk about those when you...
we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but the movie doesn't kind of push against those ideas. It really pushes against those ideas. So, but anyway, I guess what I was trying to say is that the Wachowskis do a very good job of making this world look like one you want to escape. And another thing that we want to talk about that I know we want to kind of tread lightly around, because like none of us are obviously experts on this stuff, but what I will say is that it's very interesting knowing the personal history of the Wachowskis, that it's very obvious when you watch their early films that they're very interested with playing with these concepts of gender.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you watch Bound, there's like basically Gina Gershon's character is coded like Robert Mitchum, like from the opening shot. Like you could digitally replace her with Robert Mitchum, and like you could re-release the film.
I mean, I think Robert Mitchum is a good-looking dude, but I think Gina Gershon is better looking than Robert Mitchum. I'm just gonna put that.
I mean,
there.
I can understand how you get there. And I'm just.
I mean, I do think Robert Mitchum was handsome. He was handsome. He was a ruggedly handsome dude for sure. But Gina Gershon was one of my like nascent teenage crush objects. So
But just the costuming, the camera angles, like all the coding is very explicitly like
masculine,
old school male on her.
Yeah.
And in this film, obviously, as far as it pertains to transgenders issues, the most explicit reference got cut out in the script, which was that the idea that the character named Switch was going to be male in the real world and female in the Matrix. But they decided that was a little bit too far and ended up changing it. They just cast someone super androgynous.
Yeah, they're androgynous in both places. They're very androgynous.
But there's little jokes and hints all over the place in this one. My favorite one being that in the scene where Neo is doing the elite hacking and goes out to the club.
Right. I thought you were a guy.
Is once again being social and cool. Yeah, literally the very first thing that he says to Trinity is, "I thought you were a guy." Like there are little jokes and things like all over the place here.
Well,
it's a very fun film.
So I don't know if the Wachowskis have commented on it, but I mean the in hindsight, there's a lot of people who have made and like we've said, there's sort of a Rorschach blot on this, but knowing, as Bryce said, what we know about the Wachowskis' personal history, it's not hard to see this whole film as a metaphor for transitioning, right? Especially there's, he feels like he's not who he really is until he's out of the Matrix. And there's the whole thing where Agent Smith keeps dead naming him, basically, right? Keeps insisting on calling him Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Anderson. And he has to correct him and say, my name is Neo, and then he gets run over by a train. So I don't know if the Wachowskis have explicitly discussed any of that stuff, but it doesn't feel like a reach to me to read this film in hindsight as a transgender allegory or a metaphor for transitioning.
There's a movie that just came out that was released on Netflix. I think maybe even last. I think it was during a time when everyone was in quarantine. It's called Disclosure, and it does not star Michael Douglas.
I was gonna say the Michael Douglas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is an incredible movie. I think that I would recommend that everyone see both movies called Disclosure. One of them has Michael Douglas doing some Johnny Mnemonic shit where he goes into the digital realm to like battle his evil ex who's trying to steal his paperwork or something. The other movie, Disclosure, is a documentary that just came out on Netflix that's about trans representation in cinema, and then I think to a lesser extent TV. And Lily Wachowski is in that movie as an interview subject, and the Matrix isn't, it's not prominent in that movie, but she does comment briefly on it, saying something about how those themes are there, but they never intended it as like that wasn't the story that they were trying to tell. But I suppose, like, by virtue of that being their identity,
it came through in the sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Directed the film.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you don't. That's the fun thing about allegory and metaphor, right? Is that you can look for it if you want to, and this movie certainly invites, as we said, a lot of that. Or you can just be like, it's about people in black leather kicking each other, and that's fine too.
Right. Works on so many levels.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Also, I love this is in the age where he's his boring day job. He goes to the cool kid goth club, like the ones that I used to hang out in and still occasionally do. And then he goes to work, he gets yelled at, whatever. And then Morpheus calls him and he has to try to escape. He can't bring himself to like go for the scaffold and climb up or whatever. So he gets taken in by the agents. This movie is in a time when we were still doing just a little bit with digital effects and closing the gap with practical effects. So the effect of his mouth getting sealed is digital when you see it happen, and then as soon as it's sealed shut, it's a practical makeup effect, and it's so good.
Yeah.
When we talk about this movie just being this kind of delightful melange, like, yeah, this sudden left turn into fucking Cronenbergian body horror,
yes, yep.
Is just mwah, chef's kiss.
This was also one of the parts I had completely forgotten in the movie.
Oh, really? This scene stuck with me because it freaked the mouth melding thing freaked me out.
Well, what if you can't talk? And I was like, what? Yeah, it was good.
I love just the whole cast of this movie. Can we say this now? Like, I mean, Keanu, like, he was literally born to play this role. Like, I don't think you can think of like one. I mean, even as good as he is in John Wick, like, to me, this role plays to his strengths and his limitations just so absurdly well.
Is the story about Will Smith maybe being in this movie? Is that well known by this point?
That's yeah.
Yeah, well, I
think so.
I was going to get to that later. And then Carrie-Anne Moss is great in it, obviously, and
I actually think Carrie-Anne Moss is one of the weaker links, honestly.
I agree.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like she's charismatic, and I think she kind of sells the turn at the end from being this very cold, pragmatic person for the whole film to that romantic moment at the end.
That's legitimately my least favorite part of the movie.
We might be striking on why most people don't like the sequels here, but we can get to that later. But I just want to point out that office scene is just such a perfect bastard as Agent Smith.
Yes,
and
he's
I
really
was
good.
distressed by how young he looked to me in this film now. Like, I just remember him being like, so the epitome of anonymous middle age in here.
Yep.
Seeing that movie the first time,
Sorry.
and this time I'm watching it, go like, oh man, his hairline's looking pretty good.
Yeah,
You're moisturizing, like.
Honestly, I think he
go,
looks.
like-
I feel like he looks the same. Like he's a vampire. I guess I haven't seen him in anything since. It's been a little while, but yeah, right. Keanu doesn't look that much older either, compared to how much older he actually is.
But when we're talking about the alternate casting of Will Smith, I don't think that would have worked. And when
No,
I say this,
I agree. That would not have worked.
I don't want anyone to think I'm taking anything away from this performance, because I think Lawrence Fishburne is amazing in the film, and he's such a rock. And he basically has to sell a lot of the most difficult monologues in the film, and basically through those monologues, sell the world. And I think he knocks both of them out of the park.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I would give my left nut to briefly go to the alternate universe where when Neo picks up the phone, Sean Connery answers and goes, "You may have spent the last 2 years looking for me, but I've spent my entire life looking for you." He would have been such a...
What? Sorry, was he on the list?
He was on the list. He was really close. When the Will Smith incarnation was going to happen, he was going to be Morpheus. And the story goes, and this might be partially apocryphal, but I don't think so, is that he was sent the Matrix and he passed on it. And just the scene where he screams and breaks the chains, that would have been great. He was sent the Matrix and he passed on it because he didn't get it. And he watched it become this worldwide phenomenon. And then he was sent
League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
No. He was sent the Lord of the Rings and offered Gandalf, and he didn't get it, and he watched it become a worldwide phenomenon. So he literally said to his agent, the next weird thing that I don't get, you make me do, and it was League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Oh. So he that made him quit filmmaking.
Quit acting,
literally.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That was
Which is where he's a good Alan Quartermain, hypothetically. That movie just sucks.
Yeah, it did.
But he's a great choice, as I would love to see him in a good Alan Quartermain movie, is the thing.
Yeah.
Or a good League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie that's more faithful to Alan Moore's book.
But, you have, but then, we're kind of at the like we're talking about with Lawrence Fishburne, the infamous red pill sequence.
Yeah,
and for all of the baggage, it still works for me.
The scene absolutely still works, and you have to kind of push that out of your mind because the chuds have really taken over the red pill thing. So anybody who doesn't know what we're talking about, just don't. I don't want to explain it.
Just don't. Yeah.
I don't want to explain it.
Just say no to red pilling.
Just say no to red pilling. But the short answer is a bunch of really shitty people have taken over that. Have taken over that term, because in the movie when he takes the red pill, he sees the world for what it really is, which has nothing to do with women, whatever.
I think when we say a lot of shitty people, it's not just a bunch of shitty people in numbers. It's a myriad of shitty people.
It is. It's a variety
It's a cacophony of different types.
Yeah, I had to...
Jordan Peterson sells a lot of books.
Yeah. Megan is extremely not online, and I envy her. For it.
Really
But she was like, so wait, she's like, am I confusing red pillars with incels? And I was like, no.
No.
All incels are red pillars, but not all red pillars are incels, you see.
Very, very important distinction.
Yeah, right. So, but the scene is great. So he takes so they're in this, and the set design in this film is fantastic. They're in this sort of decrepit sitting room study, and he gives him the option of the two pills. And the way it's shot with the sunglasses, where one lens has the red pill hand in it and one lens has the blue pill hand in it, and they both have Keanu's face in them. And, he takes the red pill, and then they go and hook him up to all these machines, and they take a phone off a hook and set it on top of an old school modem. And all this stuff, so they can trace where his body really is in the real world, where his signal's coming from. And then the scene with the mirror, the bit with the mirror, it's same scene. He touches the mirror, and the mirror gets on him and crawls up his arm and in his mouth, and it's all that stuff is good, real good stuff.
Yeah. Once again, you can't really call this a horror film, but it definitely has a lot of horror.
It has some beats,
moments it directly into the next one where he comes out of a a pod naked and gooey and basically gets aborted, and it is a fucked up transition moment, and once again, like, I think it's interesting that, like, a lot of the ways that this both is a seminal, hero's journey film, and like very counter to that, because like instead of like the moment when you see the wider world and it's like this really cool adventure that you're going to go on, the wider world is like you waking up, like you have a bunch of tubes like stuck on you. The very first thing you have to do in your moment of consciousness is pull a ventilator out of your throat, and then a robot comes down. You see a bunch of humans like in a farm, and you literally get like flushed down the tubes.
Yeah,
like that's your call to adventure right there.
It's, I mean, but the idea of being trapped in a machine and then coming to the real world for the first time should be somewhat horrific, right? It shouldn't.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not.
But even so.
Yeah. So apparently, I remember seeing an interview with him around the time this came out, and this always stuck with me. Is that he said that whoever the talk show host was, and I can't remember if it was probably Letterman, but like whoever it was like, oh, so how did you like do that? And he talked about how like the studio offered to pay for him to go get like a full body waxing, and he's like, I couldn't do it, so I just sat in the bathtub for like 2 hours and shaved all of the hair off of my body in the bathtub. And I was like, man, should have just taken the waxing, dude. That sounds like a... Yeah, but...
Keanu Reeves is a man who's dedicated to his craft.
Yeah. Sat in a bathtub for 2 hours and shaved all his body hair off for that scene. Including his eyebrows and everything. If you watch that scene, he is totally... And then they grow... Like, enough time passes where he's like, they're fixing his muscles and all that stuff, where like his eyebrows are back. So he shaved his eyebrows off for one scene and then had to wait for him to come back.
So what's the advantage to the machines to not let them grow hair?
Because they would just keep growing, and it would
clog the whole... Yeah. Yep.
I guess. So did they like genetically modify them?
Is that important? Is that really like is this a plot hole? Are we doing plot hole YouTube videos now, where we're like, well, there's a plot hole where none of the people have hair, but then they grow hair when they're out of the thing. Oh, that doesn't make sense. Giant plot hole.
When they're out of there. I hadn't thought about that.
So that's a very bad. That's a very bad point, Anthony, but it does lead us to another thing, which is that this movie's world building is really good, and I know that like that is even like a dirty term at this point, but like just like giving you like the sense.
Wait, when did world building become a dirty term? Who the fuck decided that?
I think it's something that, by dirty term, I mean it's something that nerds get hung up on, and like just to me, like the sense of like the Nebuchadnezzar as like a lived-in place.
Yes.
So and once again, like it's not like it's the only film that does it. Like you can certainly say this about the Nostromo, and like there's certainly fingerprints of other stuff there, but like the idea of like these people living this life.
Alien has such good world building.
You really feel it, and to me it creates that distinction between the machine world and this very physical lived-in space.
It's part of it being lived in. This movie actually did tell the future in a way, because there's a bunch of nerds just eating Soylent, just like totally accurate. I used to work with a guy who was on the Soylent diet, and I was like,
"You're right.
Why?" He's like, "Well, because it's like efficient." I'm like, "Yeah, but it sucks." And I remember when that stuff came around, and I was like, "So it's like the nutrient slurry from the Matrix?" Like that was literally the comparison I made, and people were like, "No, it's not like that."
From RoboCop?
Yeah, right.
But Joe, it's got everything the body needs.
Doesn't have everything the body needs. It doesn't have boning, because the body needs boning.
That too.
Yeah. Was that so? Like, are we to imply? Is
Soylent people the same type of person?
Oh, sorry. Which people?
Are the red pill people and Soylent people?
There's definitely some crossover. There's definitely some crossover.
I feel
like I get the same vibe from
The dude that I worked with who was on the Soylent diet was definitely not a red pillar. It's a guy that I will give a lot of shit to for a variety of reasons, but he was I will give him that he was absolutely not a red pillar. So, for whatever that's worth. So is the implication, by the way, here that, okay, so one, I'm not going to...
Hair starts growing as soon as it's exposed to air.
Yeah, that. But also, I'm not going to say that this is a plot hole, but I am very curious what the implication is.
That's because you know what the term plot hole means.
So,
Sorry.
If Mouse hooks you up with the lady in red, I have two questions. I have two important questions about this that maybe we've covered. I feel like
the only one thinking about this.
I feel like we might have covered this on a way old episode. Now that I'm thinking about this, but like, okay, if you hook up with the lady in red, so like if you get punched in the Matrix, Neo spits up blood when he's getting beat up in the Matrix and stuff, right?
Right. Yep. That's what I'm saying.
So if you hook up with the lady in red, do you just jizz in your pants?
Yeah.
Yeah, one would have to assume so.
And also, is Mouse watching the whole time?
Well, I'd have to
That's
assume
the
that
one I want to know.
it's like nuclear submarine rules. You just accept that no one has personal space, so you just do your best not to see. Is what I imagine that situation would be like.
I have a friend who was on a submarine, and now I need to ask him if that's true, if that's really the rules.
Yeah. Would you turn your head when your friends were masturbating?
But see, depends on the friend. But that, like, now you've got me thinking. That answers my other question, which was, how does the guy who betrays them, whose name escapes me for some reason,
Cypher. Joey Pants.
How does Cypher go into the Matrix and make the deal?
That's the other.
Nobody else is watching.
Yes, I was curious about that too.
That is an actual plot hole.
No, but no, there's not. One. No, there's not. Listen, maybe he's like, Mouse, I'm going to go into the Matrix. I need like 30 minutes where you need to not be there. And he'll be like, all right, dude.
So he says he's going to hook up with the lady in red and then is actually going to do backdoor deals with the agents?
Yeah, exactly. That's
okay.
Right. He uses his...
That makes sense. That actually does make sense.
That's what I'm saying. You can close that plot hole pretty easy.
So I'll just say that I just glanced at my notes and I realized that I forgot to make a joke that I wanted to make, which is when he wakes up in the pod, Neo realizes that the sword of Damocles is hanging over his head, and he's got the feeling someone's going to be pulling the thread. For whatever reason, that song popped into my mind while I was watching this movie this time, and I laughed for 30 seconds straight, and I had to share it with you.
So that was my
continue on.
That was my best friend's. So speaking of things I did a lot in 1999. I went to the Rocky Horror Picture Show a lot in 1999. And that was my best friend's smoke break song. He hated that song, so he would always get up and go smoke outside during that song.
I'm not saying that's the best song there, but I feel like there's better smoke break songs in Rocky Horror than Sword of Damocles. There are actively worse songs in that film.
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. But not as centrally located. That's like the worst song in the second act, I think. And so you wouldn't get up. You're not going to get up 5 minutes into the movie to go smoke. So.
Right. Okay. Do we want to talk about the first action scene and the what is the Matrix scene and all that stuff? I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, unlike most of the podcasts that we do, I just feel like cultural osmosis kind of takes care of a lot of the plot summary this time.
So yeah, I mean, it really does. I think that the fight scene. I mean, again, I was surprised watching the fight scenes, the hand-to-hand fight scenes, and the gunfights, but mostly the hand-to-hand stuff of like, this is not what my brain tells me the late '90s and early aughts were like in action filmmaking. But this film, that camera is locked down, and you see everything. And props to all Hugo Weaving, Carrie-Anne Moss, Lawrence Fishburne, and Keanu, because their faces are in plain view enough that that is not a double in a lot of those shots. That is them doing it.
You know what? Now that you mention that, when we were talking about like how the direct effects of this film were surprisingly limited, I think that's one trend that's fair to say that it kicked off, which was like the idea of like at least trying to disguise doubles more. And like I remember like the Charlie's Angels films after this, like trying to convince you that Drew Barrymore could actually use kung fu. And
but she actually did a lot of the wire work herself. She did do a lot of it.
But like yes, she probably did do a lot of it, but like probably not as much as we were led to believe. Let's put it that way.
Well, sure.
And I think you can draw that directly back to this movie. of like understanding that action scenes were more exciting when you could see their faces. It's instead of like keeping everything in a long medium shot. So that I think is one of the direct antecedents to that. So
yeah.
But yeah, all good stuff.
we get the little bit of plot dump there is, but they do really move it along, and they keep it very efficient in terms of like, okay, the Matrix is a computer program that keeps people in there, and like you turn you into a battery, even though that doesn't actually make sense. People don't generate that much power, but whatever, it's not important. And
they move it along.
It's important they get that shit from the
right.
The Matrix
they move it
about.
Yes, it's about all of the composted human feces that they use to.
Master Blaster is actually underneath those farms, and he is using them to create methane. So
there you go.
That's where Matrix goes. Well, I mean, yeah, they move it along. A, Lawrence Fishburne does a great job selling it. B, the monologues themselves are well written. C, and they are all paired with interesting visuals.
Yes.
That are once again like giving you this idea of this programmable computer world. So it's how like if you want to figure out how to do exposition in a movie, there's a lot worse ones you can study.
Telling.
Right.
Yes, yeah, they're showing while they're telling, and again, there's still a lot of show and not tell. Like the thing I mentioned with the phones, and the thing with the landline escape lines too. They don't really ever explain that. You just kind of absorb it through the storytelling, which is all that stuff is good. Also, is the city is Chicago, right? Like I didn't imagine that.
All the street name, the intersections are Chicago.
Yeah, all the intersections are Chicago.
I don't think they shot anything.
And the Wachowskis themselves are from Chicago, very proudly so. So I've always assumed that it's supposed to be Chicago.
Yeah, because one of the last exit is on Lake and Wacker or Lake and Randolph or something, and I was like, hey, I know where that is.
Apparently, I guess prior to March, they were shooting the fourth one in San Francisco.
Oh, that's right. They're making a fourth one.
Town.
They are, and they have started shooting again in Germany, where things are a little bit more under control. And I'm looking forward to that one.
I can't wait to see a scene where they splice together.
If it's
San Francisco and Germany.
Hey, you know what, man? Dark Knight Rises, I think, did some really it was like that's Pittsburgh, that's Chicago, and all that happened was like the camera tilted to the left, like we went from Pittsburgh to Chicago in one nanosecond. But you know what? If we get a Scream 4 type of turnout from Matrix 4 in terms of it's not the best one, but it's better than the one that came immediately before it, I'm fine with it.
What I will say is that if you could go back to my 18-year-old self when I'm putting down maybe my two favorite things at the time were David Mitchell and the Wachowskis. If you could tell me that as I'm setting down Cloud Atlas for the first time, that David Mitchell would be writing a script for The Matrix 4, I think he would have literally had to take pliers to get my skull fragments out of the wall. My head would have exploded with such pressure that it would have driven like nails from a gun.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of glad that didn't happen until my mid-30s because I might have had a coronary.
Wouldn't have been able to take it.
Why? But I'm sort of optimistic. I know nothing about this movie other than
I'm
what's happening.
Cautiously optimistic
but I'm
about it.
Man,
it's only one of them who's making it, right?
Is it?
Yes, it's only Lana who's in the director's chair. I think they're both collaborating, but I don't think
Lily.
I don't think Lily has been officially in the director's chair since 8. So
for some reason, I just feel like how badly regarded the other two are, and how well regarded these two are post those two movies. I feel like those two things combined makes it they might actually turn out something good.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear Bryce's defense. So I feel like since we've been going for an hour and a half, we should maybe windsock our way through the rest of the movie.
We should,
but
do we want to
this is sort of
the
movie itself. I paused the movie when they first actually enter the Matrix, the whole group does, and then the actual action and everything happens. That's over an hour into the movie.
Yeah. Yep.
I paused it and I was like, man.
But it moves so
After the
fast.
first
It's
hour
so
was
efficient.
dedicated- It
It's
does.
all-
It didn't feel like an
it's
hour
all
for sure.
Interested, yeah. It doesn't feel like setup. It doesn't feel like exposition. Like you are intrigued by the story the whole.
It's just kind of crazy
Whole
that the
time.
first half of the movie, feels like just the set.
It's
the setup.
it's like the
But it feels
inverse.
like the introduction. It feels like the second hour is twice as long as the first hour.
Yeah, it's like
Not
it's
in a bad way.
It's like the inverse of Batman v Superman, which is a 3-hour movie that feels like a 5-hour movie that takes two established characters that should not need any. Like, you should not need to explain to me who Batman and Superman are, but for some reason they take an hour to explain to me who Batman and Superman are.
Joe, we need to explain that Batman brands criminals so they get murdered in prison. Like that has to be established.
Yes.
It's key.
Why did you say that name? Anyways, the only things there's one thing that I do want to hit on before we leave the first Matrix completely behind, and you guys, I'll give everybody a chance to sort of say their last bit about it. Aside from the fact that this is the second movie we've done since bringing back the action cast where there's a gonzo helicopter stunt in it at the end. Yeah. And also, I feel like only Tom Cruise movies have gonzo stunts like that anymore. Nobody else is doing crazy practical stunts like hanging off the bottom of a helicopter anymore, except for Tom Cruise, and that's really disappointing to me. But there's this whole message, like the message of this movie is a little bit mixed, and I know, Bryce, you're going to talk about how they walk some of this stuff back in the sequels, but like, it's maddening that the whole thing is like, oh, like everybody's trapped under the thumb of this technocracy, man, and the machines are, and we're going to free everybody. But then there's this heavy thematic stuff about fate and how Neo doesn't believe in fate, but it doesn't matter because like the presence of the Oracle and all of that shit indicates that in the text of this film, fate does exist and is governing what is happening. So even though you're there, it's like it's a fight to throw off the shackles of the oppressive computer thing so that you can then in turn just be a slave to a predestined end and life path because everything is fated already and you're just on a track and that's it. And like, okay. And I was just like, those things feel like they're at odds with each other. And that they make such a big deal out of the fate thing, and Neo doesn't believe in fate, but the Oracle, blah blah blah, and you'll remember you don't believe in all that fate crap, but obviously everything the Oracle says comes true, so it's there in the text. I was just like, that's weird to me, and I'm not gonna get bogged down in it because the punching is fucking rad, so like I don't really care that much, but it's just weird that in this movie that is sprinkled with all these sort of philosophy 101 college freshmen, like, what is real, man? Then there's this whole thing about like, don't be a slave to the machines, but be a slave to fate. That's fine. I just thought that was weird.
I mean, to me, like that's just a question of like text versus sub. I mean, like to me, that's more text than it is subtext. And I think that's something that the story is actively dealing with,
Yeah.
and obviously much more boldly in the sequels than in the original. But I don't know. It's like to me, like part of the reason why I'm so negative on this is, I know, going off on another tangent because we didn't have enough of those. But like part of the reason why I'm so
On this show?
Why I'm so negative on Rick and Morty and like the whole Dan Harmon empire is because I feel like it's selling soft nihilism and it's selling hard determinism, but it's doing it because it's made by people who've been writing sitcoms for 20 years. It's doing it with like disingenuously. And it's doing it with like a smile on its face. And like to me, as long as you're willing to grapple with these things honestly, I don't think they should be off limits. But I don't feel like I don't get that sense in this film, and that's something that I
don't think they're being disingenuous about the way you seem to feel about Rick and Morty, Rick and Morty is one of those things where the fan base is so obnoxious that I've just never watched the show because the fans have made me feel like I already hate it, even though I've been told I would like it. I just can't because the fan base is like the most obnoxious bunch of people in the universe.
See, I'm the exact opposite.
Yeah,
of you.
I hate both it and the fans.
So
I got both my bases
but
covered.
but I don't feel like I don't feel like the Wachowskis are disingenuous about any of this stuff. I just feel like the narrative is confused. That's all I'm saying. I don't think they're being bullshitty about it. I just think it's not consistent in the text. And again, it doesn't matter that much because the face kicking is aces. But
Is it?
yes, absolutely, absolutely. The action sequences in this movie are fucking rad.
Yeah, I think I get what Anthony was saying. Like, there's a couple of times where like you can maybe see the pulled punches that you wouldn't be if this movie got made 5 years later.
Okay.
But, like, I don't think it matters.
I
It doesn't.
Yeah, I feel like that's but to Joe's point earlier about like this is at the cusp of shaky cams and you can't really see what's going on anyways, which makes me completely disinterested.
But it's not doing that. This movie isn't
that's
doing
what I'm
that.
saying. This movie is not doing it. It's right before cinema did that.
Yes.
And I really appreciate. So even if you get the occasional like that was kind of a pulled punch, but I don't really care. I don't think there's too many spots where I can really see it.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking more like I can't believe I'm saying this, like the lobby scene.
Right.
Like
The lobby scene is good,
rad.
actually.
It starts out rad and there's some good shots, but there's a whole bunch of like we're doing a thing in fucking slow motion because it looks fucking rad, and I like.
Well,
I fail to see the problem.
But because they did it too much, and I was just kind of like, all right, like that's cool, but like get to the part where you like shoot the guy.
Look, in the post John Wick era, you probably wouldn't dedicate 30 seconds of screen time to Keanu Reeves doing a cartwheel.
A cartwheel,
But like
a no hands cartwheel, which is pretty badass, by the way.
It's still fun, and like the choreography is really creative, and like so even if it is like a little long in tooth, it's a 21-year-old fucking movie.
And there's that the needle drop on the propeller head spy break is just like it's the score written for the film as they're coming in, and then he opens his coat full of guns, and then as soon as he kicks that cop, they drop the needle on propeller heads.
And I have to note again, just gives it to this rando security guard worse than anyone in the fucking movie. But there you go.
But he could be an agent later, so it doesn't matter, Bryce. It's fine.
It's still fucking funny.
He's just a guy that can't grow hair anyways.
Right.
Yeah, put him out of his misery.
Right.
He'll never know what it's like to have a beard.
It's true.
Or like anything on any hair his head.
No.
But it's like if we're trying to wrap this up, like I don't think there's like that much to say from this point on, except like it is good. Like they go to the Oracle and it is good, and then there's like a fight scene and like you have political subtext and it's good,
right?
And then you have like the big fight scene and it's good, and then you have the duel between Agent Smith and Neo and it's good, and then like you have the big reveal with Trinity and I think that's good too, and then you have like the big last shot with the
big reveal with Trinity sucks, dude.
Yeah, with Rage Against the Machine, and that is also good. So it's all good.
The reveal with Trinity sucks, but it doesn't suck as bad as the counterbalance reveal in the sequel, where he literally reaches into her chest and massages her heart back to life. Oh my God! Why? Yeah, no.
That's what I like about the Wachowskis as filmmakers, is because they're willing to go for it. Like every single.
That's
movie
not always.
Is just one big.
That's not always honorable. Sometimes restraint is valuable.
It is absolutely.
I want us to move on to the phase where, because I have not seen those movies at all. I like heard they were bad from my friends.
I saw
15 years ago or whatever, and never saw them.
So let me tell you how hype I was on The Matrix, since we're transitioning to the sequels.
We were all
transition. I've got one more.
Oh yes, no.
Media to recommend that I think it relates. It feels like it relates to my experience, not my experience watching the movie initially, but this rewatch. There was an article that was in the New York Times. It was an opinion column called "We Can't See Star Wars Anymore." It was written by Tim Kreider. It was published in this past December, and it was about how when audiences first went to see Star Wars, they went in completely cold. It was like, oh, we're gonna see this thing that's like a throwback to the 50s sci-fi shorts or whatever.
Yeah, serials.
It's gonna be cheesy. It's gonna be like a 70s cheap sci-fi movie, and they got everything that they got in the first Star Wars movie, and then there are a whole bunch of things they didn't get too. Like they don't know, oh, this guy in this bar, here's his name, here's the the species that he is.
Well, at least until the action figures started coming out.
Yeah. And I felt like, I don't know what it is about this movie, if it is anything about this movie that makes it so people like took a big layoff from watching it. Like the first Terminator movie, for instance, like I end up watching that like every couple years. I end up watching the first Alien movie every couple years.
Yes.
So like I will never have the experience probably of going in like refreshed to that. I, for whatever reason, was able to go into this refreshed, and if there's anyone else who's watching this who like for whatever reason, like maybe because you know you heard the sequels were so bad and you just don't bother, that you haven't seen the first Matrix movie in like 10 plus years, or I don't know, Bryce, you said you'd seen it more recently, but like watch it because it like super duper holds up.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And I mean, I think that's interesting that we can't, like, there are movies that I do try to go in cold on still to a certain extent, but I mean, I think the thing about like getting surprised by something on the level of Star Wars is much harder in today's climate. And actually, I was just telling my wife earlier, we were talking about, you know, when we were kids or whatever, and the first movie that I saw that I was super hyped for, but like hadn't seen enough of in trailers to like really know what I was getting, was the Ninja Turtles movie, which came out 30 years ago this summer. And I went, my mom took me on opening night, and the theater was packed with kids my age and their parents, and it was jammed up, and it was, and like when the whole first sequence where they attack the muggers in the alley, but you don't see them at all. And then they're going through the sewers, and Leo jumps in. He's like about to jump into frame, but it freezes, and the title comes up. And then, like, as soon as every kid in that theater saw their first live action Ninja Turtle, the place went fucking bananas. And I feel like, you know, that's similar. Like, that's my seeing Star Wars in 1977 because I wasn't born in 1977. So, like, as a kid seeing this movie. And knowing what the Ninja Turtles were, but like having no idea what I was in store for, like that was that. And yeah, I mean, I kind of agree that it's really hard to have that experience now, which is kind of a bummer. But I agree with Ethan in that if you haven't watched The Matrix in 10 or 15 years, like three of us hadn't, you should definitely revisit it for sure. And with that, let's move on to Bryce's tepid defense of the sequels.
And once again, this is a full-throated defense of the
yeah.
No,
well, so
we're saying you're going to be tepid.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
well, actually, I suppose so. The first one came, or the first sequel came out 2 years later.
So 3
years later.
More than that. It had to 4 years later because they shot him back to back.
They shot him concurrently.
Concurrently. So anyway. Here essentially, and I know that we've gotten obscenely long, so I'll try and keep this brief. But here's my summation for the Matrix sequels in a nutshell. They have two big problems, right? Which is that
they're not good and they're not good.
Thank you, Joe. That was definitely trenchant. So it is your attack that is being tepid, sir. Frankly, Joe, I'm a little surprised that you're so, because you're a usual Mr. Not Received Wisdom, and like if anything, like we kind of talked about like how the Matrix like made nerdery like as close to mainstream as it ever gotten, and like this probably just took it 1 degree too far, so like people just started rejecting it.
I saw both of these movies on opening night and I went out to I went out to and so where I grew up in Wisconsin, there was in the next county over, there was a Marcus Cinema with the Ultra Screen, the biggest screen that wasn't IMAX that you could get on, you know, in the area. And so a bunch of my friends and I like pre-bought tickets for the midnight showings on opening night, drove out to fucking Waukesha to watch The Matrix Reloaded on the Ultra Screen, and then for some reason, even after hating that movie, did it again with The Matrix Revolutions. And it's the same as Phantom Menace, man. Like, I saw both those movies on opening night, and I walked out of there being like, what the fuck was that?
Well, this is not a film that is interested in fulfilling audience expectations. It really does feel like it was made to piss off like the people on fanfiction.net. But anyway, going back to what I was trying to say is that these films, like as a whole, I'm not saying they're flawless, but their two main issues are that a lot, like obviously The Matrix was a very ambitious film, but like what was his budget, like 60 million, something like that. Like but it's a pretty small scale film in a lot of ways, and as we noted already, a lot of its CGI is actually augmented with practical effects, and the bullet time stuff is like very limited in a way. So there are effects that the sequels go for when you have basically that budget times, times 10, that aren't quite there yet. So a lot of the CGI has aged like soft cheese. Like, I'm not saying that it hasn't. The other main problem
so far.
I'm acknowledging
Soft
the issues the
cheese.
film has.
Writing that down.
The other issue that the film has is that none of the new characters that it introduces are as interesting as the main trio, the core. But here's what it comes down to me, is both of those things don't actually become problems until the third film. Like, the third film is where it becomes very reliant on those effects that aren't there yet, and it's asking you to spend a lot of time with these new characters who you don't give a shit about. The second sequel, to me, like, pretty much works from the first minute to the last. And the reason is because it's leaning into a lot of those questions that Joe was talking about. It's basically structured as a series of deterministic puzzle boxes where Neo keeps being put in these situations where he's like helmed in by fate or causality or, other people's plans or things he can't change. And it's all about watching him trying to work his way out of this until the very end, where it's revealed that the Matrix itself is a system of control. And it's just this huge fuck you to the entire concept that the film has been building to for two films. I mean, the first film sends you out on this power fantasy high and, Rage Against the Machine blasting, and man, we're gonna take down like the big evil baddies, right? And the second film goes, okay, no, everything that you've been fed is just another system of control. Those big evil baddies, you actually need them to survive because, humans without machines are basically non-equipped apes. Everything that you've been doing has been done before. We've already seen around it. We've already worked about it. It basically takes this perfect little power fantasy that the first film had, crumples it up, and goes, what are you going to do about it? And in the midst of it all is managing to make it like a very entertaining film. Like, for my money, this film has Bill Pope's career best work. And I say that, like, I do not say that lightly. I think, like, that whole stretch of filmmaking from the first encounter with the Merovingian to the end of the highway chase is one of the best sustained American action set pieces, like, ever. If it wasn't for The Raid and Fury Road, I'd say it's my favorite sustained action piece of the 21st century. Like, there is just really high quality, smart, subversive genre filmmaking on display in The Matrix Reloaded, and I find it weird that people don't appreciate it because it didn't give them what they wanted. I mean, this is a film that has fucking Cornel West in it, okay? This is not your typical studio product. And, like, I just imagine everything being so focus grouped and drafted and impersonal these days. And I'm trying to imagine any one of the IPs that, the studio system is built on these days, taking the kind of risks with its story that The Matrix Reloaded takes, and I literally can't imagine it. Like, it's this movie's one of a kind, and I for one find it.
I will say that highway scene is the only thing I remember about either of those movies.
Yeah, the highway. So is this also the highway scene, and then there's the fight in the chateau or whatever, right? That's all sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good sequence. Sure. Yeah, that's great. That's fine. And the fight with all the Agent Smiths on the playground is this one or the third one?
That's the second one, and yes, that has obviously not aged well. But the point of it is that it's.
But it's fine. It's fine.
Looking for a cool scene.
The Agent Smith clones are not like the Agent Smith clones are not great, but I think that scene is interesting for what it is, even if the visual effects don't hold up.
I think a lot of people kind of point to that scene as what's wrong with this film, and I just want to say that I feel like it's kind of it's not what's wrong with this film, but it's kind of counter to the reaction, because that scene isn't about how cool it is that Neo gets to fight a bunch of Agent Smiths. That scene is about his frustration, and so that's I think people saw that Rage Against the Machine fly into the sky, and they wanted Neo kicking ass for 2 hours, and instead they were essentially given a film about frustration and control.
Right.
And I understand that that's not what we wanted, but what you got is pretty cool.
Well, but I mean, The Empire Strikes Back is also a film about, frustration and Luke having a dark part of his journey where he's largely impotent, can't save anyone, can't fix anything, is stuck on Dagobah for the second half of the movie, and people still love that movie. It was not at all what they expected coming out of the original Star Wars. But so part of the problem is that the original Matrix was not meant to be a film with a sequel, right? So it was meant to be a standalone thing, and it would come to an end, and it would be over, and then he flies off, and the implication is that he fixes things. And then the studio wanted more of them, and the Wachowskis were like, all right, we like money, and we had fun making that, so we'll make 2 more. And they're building on a thing that was never meant to be really built on. But the problem I have with the film is that it's not that all the things you're saying aren't accurate, and from a thematic perspective, I get why you would enjoy those things, and it has that really good action beat kind of in the middle, but the stuff with the architect is insufferable. That whole sequence, just stop the movie and have this guy just explain everything. It's the opposite of the first movie in terms of we're showing and not telling, and then in this movie we're going to literally sit you down and have a guy who is a personification of a program that runs the whole shop, and he's going to explain to you, the audience, what the hell is going on for 10 minutes of just him monologuing about this is actually the 6th Matrix, and you're actually part of the thing to make it so that it resets naturally, and then we can make a new Matrix, and then blah, blah, blah. And then, I repeat this just to drive home the point, he literally reaches into Trinity's heart and pulls a bullet out of it. And oh my god,
Yeah, but going back to the architect scene, just because the Burly Brawl, it's seems to be a lot of people's breaking point of the film. To me, it's 5 minutes of the movie. You don't like it, there's a lot of other movie around it. It just seems it's maybe not the most elegantly done scene, but the dilemma it sets up for that character and the revelations it makes about the world are interesting to me. That's not a problem you can fix by punching. That's it's just one of the moments where I feel like this franchise makes a lot of decisions to become more interesting than it needed to be, and I think that's one of the moments. So yeah, that scene's a little clumsy, ergo concordantly don't really roll off the tongue, but what it does to that character and the choices it forces him to make, and the implications of the world building and the complete middle finger that it sends to the Chosen One narrative are all really interesting to me. So.
Yeah, I mean,
once again, it's 5 minutes of the movie.
Sure, but I guess to me it's emblematic of what's wrong with the movie, and that, sure, thematically all that stuff is interesting, but it just doesn't move at the same pace. It doesn't, like you said, a lot of the new characters aren't as interesting as the original characters. I haven't even talked about the cave rave and the unsexiest love scene ever committed to film.
The cave rave maybe goes on a little long, but I will defend the cave rave in concept, I will say. So
I mean, okay, but in execution it's not good, and the scene of Trinity and Neo boning down during the cave rave is just I'm just did a human being direct this? Who did this and found this sexy? Was it just that did Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu Reeves secretly hate each other? I don't know what's happening here, but this is not sexy at all. And it was just I don't know. It's just it did not work for me. And any time that I've revisited parts of it, it has continued to not work for me. I have not sat down and watched the whole thing again since I saw it in the theater. But any of the sequences that I've watched, that again, the truck chase, the fight in the mansion, That's stuff that I've looked at again and been like, yeah, that's that's kind of fun. But any other stuff is yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I feel like I made my case for the second one, but for the third one, all I'll say is that, yeah, you're spending a lot more time with the characters from the sequels than you should be, rather than the main trilogy. What I will say for it is you have Bruce Spence, which is always a pleasure. You have some really great visuals. Like, one thing I like is it's been showing the machine world as, like, this very industrial, like, cold, precise world. And then at one point, Keanu basically gets machine vision, so he gets to see how the machines are processing the machine world, and there are these very kind of strange Mandela like architectures of light, and it's just a very cool tweak on it, and the idea of these two things being humans and machines being very different intelligences, and like the machines creating this thing that's for them is very beautiful, and for us is like this extremely unfriendly industrial landscape. And talking about Joe's complaints with the with about like the thematic parts of the second half of the film, I just need to note that the film literally ends with existential self-determination punching nihilistic causality in the face. So how am I not supposed to love that a little bit? Like, it's a beautiful thing. So
yeah, sure. I mean, it also just, again, it feels thematically very muddled, because you talk about all that stuff in the second one of, now Neo, there's all this fate stuff, and it's the sixth Matrix, and Neo can't save everything and can't. But then in the third one, he basically does. He still manages to save everything. He stops the machines from trying to destroy Zion. They reboot the Matrix, and it's implied that people who want to leave will willingly be set free of the Matrix so that they can go live in Zion, and everything is at as good an equilibrium as it could possibly be. And it's just
so
like...
That to me, though, is thematically consistent, because it's the idea that, his predecessors and others did buy into this deterministic causality-based universe, and the fact that he wouldn't is, essentially what gave people a new way forward. So, like, to me, that is thematically consistent with what the film is attempting to say. So whether or not you think it's successful is one thing, but it is consistent.
I guess. The third one, I can't even remember. Like, I remember some of the action sequences in the third one. I remember the machines are like they're attacking.
Yeah, that when I talk about the soft cheese, the machine attack on Zion is pretty much pure soft cheese. Like, I'm not gonna go out of my way to defend that. I will say that you've got one really cool practical fight scene where you have people running on like the ceiling, Jacob Exorcist 3 style. That was all done practical. That's pretty fun to watch. And I think like the last Smith Neo duel is pretty fun, and like that's close to as good
it's
big
okay
DBZ as we're gonna get.
But, yeah, that's probably true. It's okay, but that's one where the CG has aged really poorly, where he's in the rain and all the Smiths are lining the street, and yeah.
Looks better than the Burly Brawl, and it looks better than the machine fight. Like, that's all true. I can say. The machine fight, it takes me out of the film. In the final Smith Neo duel, it does not. So now we didn't have time to get into Cloud Atlas and Speed Racer and Jupiter's Ascending, and I have thoughts on all of those. But
we'll have to save those for another time, I suppose. We should actually do Speed Racer at some point. We should give it some time.
We should, because I've never seen it and I want to.
Speed. Okay, well, I'll just say this: Speed Racer to me is a next level film that is visual. It's next level. It's visually innovative and appealing in ways that many films aren't. Every single moment with the child and the monkey is sheer distilled cinematic pain. It literally hurts me to watch.
I mean, but that's just that's just true to the show, though, right? Yeah. That's just true to the show. Yeah. Spritle and Chim Chim were always the worst part.
It is. There's like 45 great films in that film, and the rest of it, I'm just like, I'm holding my head in my hands, begging them to cut away from the child and the monkey.
But I mean,
described it as cinematic pain and not like soft cheese again, because I feel like everyone besides me on this is giving soft cheese a bad name, and I think even aged soft cheese can be good. You got the nice bloomy rind with like the kind of ashy texture.
Yeah, no argument there.
Yeah.
I think when a soft cheese gets 20 years old, it's pretty funky.
20, yeah, exactly. Way out of date.
18-year-old.
Yeah.
No, I like a good goat cheese and a good brie, so I did not mean to defame the name of soft cheese.
Okay, yeah.
So.
How about it aged like milk? How's that? Is that better? It aged like milk.
That's all
There
I
you go.
want to bring to it.
Well, does anybody else have any thoughts on the sequels? Because Bryce and I duked it out a little bit there, but I feel like nobody else. Well, Ethan, you hadn't even seen him, right? But yes, he literally reaches into Trinity's chest and
just to see what I think.
massages her heart back to
Let me
life.
put it this way: I would be very intrigued what Ethan would think on the sequels. They're in a lot of ways very you
That's
films.
true.
Yeah.
I have no idea where you would land.
I'll
That's
do the
true.
second one.
That's true.
If I don't like it, I'm not going to do the third one. I'm not going to make the mistake
That's
of many
fair,
an 18-year-old. But
No,
yeah, I'll
don't.
do the second
If you hate the second one, you will not find any redemption in the third one. That much I can promise you.
I will go ahead and agree with you on that. On this, Joe and I can agree.
All right.
So.
What about you, Anthony?
Well,
Say what?
I said, what about you, Anthony, on the
What
sequels?
about? They fucking suck.
Okay.
I said when we talked about this, I refused to make this a podcast about the trilogy because I have better things to do with those hours. I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm locked inside with nowhere to go until the end of time.
Yeah.
I still have better things to do than watch the movies at a good time.
I'm very
well,
curious
Anthony,
to
you
see.
really know how to hurt a guy.
Just telling it like it is.
I'm really curious to see where they go with the fourth one. I will say that. I'm
I
very
will-
curious to see
I
what
will
they
say.
do.
I will say this: that I have literally no idea and no expectations of where they could possibly take that story, and that just makes me even happier. Like I'm so happy that that's the one thing the Rona didn't take from us.
Because Mad Max 3 is the worst Mad Max, and the 20 plus year later sequel to that was awesome. So
The best Mad Max.
is this probably the second best Mad Max? Yes.
No, it's the best one.
Also, Mad Max 3 is not that bad. Come on.
No,
It's got a dead hour in it,
Oh, it does, but
at least.
all the other stuff is great.
But the bookends are good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tina Turner.
Yeah. No. There's a good
Bartertown's a great environment.
I didn't say that
I
Mad
mean,
Max
that's
3
something
was bad. I just said it was the
Right.
worst Mad Max film, which is true.
Right.
It is indisputably the worst Mad Max.
I'd say a good opening 45 and a good closing 45 minutes to give it more of its due.
I actually haven't watched it in a really long time, and I've been kind of dreading it, but I do have the Blu-ray set, so I should just rewatch it.
No, it's fine. Like seriously, like just knowing that there's a good part at the end of the movie helps with the middle part, which is just slow. That's its biggest problem.
So what you're telling me, Anthony, is that you did need another hero. You did in fact need a way home.
Yeah.
So.
Correct.
I think we've been going for 2 hours and 10 minutes now, so I think it's time to wind down this month's edition of the Action Cast.
Can we thank the listeners for listening to 35-year-old men talk about how Internet 1.0 was better?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks everybody who.
5-year-olds are the only ones who want to talk about
If you made it this far.
Reminisce about our misspent youth. Yeah.
No,
Thank you for coming to our group therapy session.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I watch this movie and I see those Nokia phones where you press the button and it just shoots down.
Yeah.
I want that.
still-
I want that as a shell for my smartphone.
Right.
I still look at that and I think like, damn, I bet that
Yeah,
cost like
exactly.
$400.
Yeah, exactly. It's fucking cool.
I remember at the time being very envious of Morpheus's sunglasses that just like rested on his nose without over the ear stems. That.
So guys, how big were your clothes when you watched this movie for the first time?
So I actually was not part of the big clothes trend. I didn't have Jenko jeans or anything like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say mine weren't quite Jenko size, but they were definitely on the baggier side. So
Yeah.
I had big clothes, but it was not like I'm styling with my big clothes. It was like I desperately needed a Queer Eye treatment because I
Oh,
was
yes,
it was
that's
it
for
was,
sure.
it was more about like body loathing and just
Yeah,
the generalized self-hatred of the time.
This
That's
was
what it was more about.
this was actually I think around the time that I actually started getting into better shape, and so I was buying a lot of tighter clothes. In fact, because I was very pleased with my physique for the first time
Well,
ever.
for you.
And, well, one of the things about this movie is all the, like, pleather fashions. Like, I also identified with that quite heavily, because I definitely had pleather pants and a pleather jacket at around this time, for sure. Smoked a lot of clove cigarettes, too, around this time, so. But, yeah, okay, I think that means we're done. When I start reminiscing about smoking clove cigarettes, that means it's time to be done for this month. We'll be back every...
Soothing clove cigarette in The Matrix Reloaded is the message of the action cast.
Absolutely.
I've never smoked a cigarette in my life, but I'll smoke a clove while I watch The Matrix Reloaded.
You should. That seems appropriate. That feels very appropriate, to me at least.
Take a cool picture. It'll be great.
The action cast. 4 men trying to capture their spent youth, the glories of their clove cigarette days. Baggy jeans were all the rage.
Not just baggy jeans where the leg was as wide as the waist. Like, that was what was happening at that time.
Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Pepperidge Farm remembers Jenkos. But we'll be back. So we do this every second Monday of every month at 10 p.m. Central Time. And we'll be back in August with something. I have no idea. We don't even know yet. But we'll be back with something. And thanks everybody. If you made it this far, you're a true super fan. And we're still actually waiting for everybody to explain to us why you all watched Time Cop. But since you're not watching anything else after that either, it's hard for us to get an answer.
Every time I think the Time Cop is about to slow down, it's like, nope, we had another 100 views on it.
Which is funny because I actually clicked on that earlier today to check the thumbnail to make sure I was making this one in the same style. And the first thing you say is that we're even less popular now than we were 5 years ago when we stopped doing this. But it turns out you're wrong.
I stand cheerfully corrected. We really struck a chord with the Time Cop people, but as you said, not enough to stay around. So
yeah, we'll see what happens. But thanks everybody for watching. If you made it this far, and we'll be back the second Monday of August with something else. And I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream now. So thanks for watching, and bye everybody.